The Republican Party got about $6 million from the rail industry, and Senate Republicans started beating the drum for Trump to repeal the rule.
It's been 10 days since a freight train carrying hazardous material derailed and exploded in the village of East Palestine, Ohio. And now we're getting a clearer picture of the policy failures that led up to this. This is a case that very likely could have been prevented if the proper protections were in place. And I'm going to get to a video shortly here explaining a bit of that, and then I'll get to more around this company, just how much money they have made while laying people off, causing even more of a safety risk. But let me play this video here. This was produced by Armand Aviram, and you'll see David Sirota in here. This is from The Lever. This is a great video breaking down the policy failures that very likely led to what happened in East Palestine.
We just saw in the middle of the country a giant chemical fireball, 100-foot flames, and very few people asking questions about what led up to this. So there was a derailment in 2012 in New Jersey,
releasing 20,000 gallons of dangerous chemicals and noxious gas into the air.
There's children in the town that are being affected by this.
And there was pressure on regulators to do something about those kinds of trains. And so the Obama administration had a rule proposed to better regulate these trains. The National Transportation Safety Board told the regulatory agency, said, listen, these regulations should broadly cover not just oil, they should cover what's known as Class 2 chemicals. And the chemical industry lobbyists went to work pressuring the regulatory agency to limit the definition of what a high hazard flammable train is. Limit it in a way that the train in Ohio, that kind of train ended up not being classified as a high hazard flammable train.
The NTSB closely monitoring 4 cars that are filled with vinyl chloride. It has been found to be linked to cancer.
Trains that were subject to this rule were going to be required to use a special kind of new braking system to try to deter or at least reduce the damage from derailments.
ECP delivers the unmatched performance of air brakes with the precision of electronic communications.
Most trains in the country are still using technology from the Civil War era. But the moment the government was considering making it a mandate, the railroad industry's changed its tune. It cited cost concerns to pressure against that rule.
We want to see federal regulations when they're necessary, not just in reaction to a headline in the Washington Post.
Obama's rule included that measure to expand the larger use of those brakes on the nation's rail system. But in that 2016 election year, the Republican Party got about $6 million from the rail industry, and Senate Republicans started beating the drum for Trump to repeal the rule. Donald Trump repealed the brake rule so that the industry does not have to even start to use these kinds of brakes. One former Federal Railroad Administration regulator told us that these brakes, which are known as ECP brakes, would have mitigated a disaster like this. And we just learned today, after the publication of our story, federal officials told us that this train did not have those brakes on the train.
All right, so before I go even deeper into this, I just want to give credit there to The Lever. The Lever does absolutely fantastic investigative reporting. They are breaking stories. They do far more than the vast majority of what the mainstream press does, and they're leading the charge on this story and exposing why this happened. So just essentially summarize that video there. David Sirota tweets out, chemical lobbyists got Obama officials to exempt trains like the one in Ohio from hazmat safety rules. Rail lobbyists got Trump officials to repeal rules requiring better brakes on trains. And Secretary Pete hasn't moved to fix the safety rules. So there is blame to go around here. Blame on the Obama administration, blame on the Trump administration, and blame on Biden and Pete Buttigieg for not patching what they can do with their power. They don't need Congress to change these rules. So before I get more on that, this is just another one of these companies that are absolutely disgusting. So this is an article from October 2021. Unions allege Norfolk Southern, that is the freight company that had this derailment, that their job cuts saddled engineers with other duties. So again, this is October 2021. Just a few months later, in March, here's what they did. Norfolk Southern announces new $10 billion stock repurchase program. So $10 billion in stock buybacks to artificially inflate their own stock just months after laying countless people off and saddling their existing employees with more duties. Again, putting even more of a strain on the system and potentially causing even further safety risks. It's all about as much money for the executives as possible, regardless of what impact that may cause. And this derailment is another example of that. So the Lever has a larger piece on the Pete Buttigieg inaction on this. Quote, there will be more derailments. So in the aftermath of a fiery Ohio train derailment, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg's department has not moved to reinstate an Obama-era safety rule aimed at expanding the use of better braking technology, even though a former federal safety official recently warned Congress that without the better brakes, quote, there will be more derailments and more releases of hazardous materials. Instead, transportation regulators have now been considering a rail industry-backed proposal that could weaken existing brake safety rules. So while this derailment's going on, they're considering actually weakening rules around braking. And the details on that here. There's at least one brake safety proposal currently under consideration by federal rail regulators, an industry-backed rule relaxing brake testing requirements. In 2021, in response to a petition from the Association of American Railroads, the FRA proposed amendments to existing safety standards that would reduce the frequency of brake testing on freight cars equipped with an electronic inspection tracking system. The changes under consideration are staunchly opposed by 5 major rail unions. It's not enough to already put the lives of countless people at risk with these derailments, the lack of safety that is in place, but they have to go even further to try and save even a few more cents, because that is how capitalism operates. Let's get to this interview with David Sirota. So there's a piece in this interview that I really want to share here. This goes to further exposing how disgusting this company is.
The railroad industry cited an amount, $3 billion. Putting these brakes on the trains that would be required to have them would cost a total of $3 billion. Now, that's about 2 weeks of operating revenue that the train system pulls in, 2 weeks of revenue in a single year, meaning it's a tiny amount of money when you're talking about the entire rail industry, but they didn't want to spend it. And my guess is they didn't want to spend it because they presume that their current safety systems are fine. And if their current safety systems fail, that governments, whether local, state, or federal, will pick up the tab for the cleanup, for the disaster. That cost is socialized to the public, not internalized by the private company. So they made a cost benefit analysis that, yeah, maybe the brakes would make things safer. They're the ones who actually said these brakes would improve safety. But in their cost benefit analysis, it still wasn't worth it to them for their profit interests.
Privatizing the gains and socializing the losses. This is across industries. This is how capitalism operates without any proper regulation in place. That's how it's meant to operate. Because why would they follow the rules? Why would they do anything if they don't have to? If it's going to save them some money? If it's going to mean a higher profit margin and more money for the shareholders? Why would they bother putting any of these restrictions in place when they don't need to? That's why you need proper regulation around these industries. Otherwise, this keeps happening. And man, the amount of lobbying, the amount of corporate greed, the amount of just absolute corruption at the heart of policymaking is showcased in this single story. Now, a couple last things here. So there's, of course, some pushback in defense of Pete Buttigieg because people are crazy. So Patrick here in this quote tweet says, Congress reinstates laws. Cabinet members can only enforce existing laws. They are law enforcers, not lawmakers. Ignoring the fact that the Trump administration, without Congress, changed the rule from the Obama administration around the braking. David Sirota here replies saying, Pete Buttigieg is the transportation secretary. The transportation secretary has safety rule-making authority. This kind of excuse is pathetic, inaccurate, and yet sadly common among those who think their job after a chemical explosion is to defend a cabinet secretary. It's very important to be objective when looking at a story like this. Yes, of course, you can see the direct connection between the Trump administration and the lack of safety when it comes to braking. Using Civil War era braking still on trains, to me, it's comically insane. Yes, you can make that direct connection. You can also make the connection to the Obama administration, and then also make the connect about the rules around chemicals and how the lobbying around that ensured that there would be no extra protections for those Class 2 chemicals that could cause an explosion like this or this deadly impact. But there's also the current administration that has the power to do something now and haven't. Like, when I first read this connection, my immediate thought is, why, as the Biden administration, why don't you come in and immediately look at what Trump did and what you can undo, what makes sense to undo? Maybe he did some things that made sense. But why not look at what he did and see, hey, we can change this back when it comes to certain rules around climate protections. He reversed a bunch of stuff just unilaterally because he could with his power. Why not look at all of those, reverse all of those back, look at rules like this, reverse this back? You think this is the first thing you would do when coming in? If you really are concerned about the impact that Trump had, as you claim to while you were running for president, why wouldn't this be the first thing you do, is look at what Trump did and reverse what he did? And for anyone to defend not doing that, to defend the inaction here, just to me is insane. You have to look at these stories objectively. You can't just look at one side and just blanketly criticize one side without looking at what can be done now. Last thing here, as there is more information coming out around the chemicals that were released. This is actually from today, a local news report here. Let me share a bit of this.
We now know 3 more chemicals that were on board the Norfolk Southern train that derailed here in East Palestine just over a week ago. And we're being told that some of those chemicals are dangerous.
We basically nuked a town with chemicals so we could get a railroad open.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter to Norfolk Southern stating that ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, ethylexyl-acrylate, and isobutylene were also in the rail cars that were derailed, breached, or on fire. Caggiano says ethylexyl-acrylate is especially worrisome. He says it's a carcinogen, and contact with it can cause burning and irritation in the skin and eyes. Breathing it in can irritate the nose, throat, and cause coughing and shortness of breath. Isobutylene is also known to cause dizziness and drowsiness when inhaled.
I was kind of surprised that when they quickly told the people they can go back home, but then said if they feel like they want their homes tested, they can have them tested. I would have far rather they did all the testing.
Caggiano says it's possible some of these chemicals could still be present in homes and on objects until you clean them thoroughly.
There's a lot of what ifs, and we're going to be looking at this thing 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line and wondering, gee, cancer clusters could pop up, well water could go bad.
Caggiano recommends anyone who's in the East Palestine area get a health checkup. He says get a record now of where your health stands so that moving forward you'll have documentation of any possibly related effects to the train derailment. In East Palestine, Jennifer Rodriguez, WKBN 27 First News.
That last piece of advice I think is fantastic. If you are in the area, absolutely get a health checkup. Ensure there is a record of where your health is now. That way, if there is any impact of these chemicals on your health going into the future, you have that record of it. The only thing this piece misses, and this is local news generally, is the actual connecting to a failure in policy and who to blame in terms of administrations, in terms of these companies and their lack of safety around it, their total lack of consideration for actual people. All local news, unfortunately, lacks that extra step. But this is why it's important to support places like The Lever and ensure reporting like this, investigative reporting like this, continues, and that there is someone holding these companies and these administrations accountable. So this also goes to, I have a hard time imagining that anything will actually get done here, that Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration will actually move to enact any of these rules unless there is some real pressure put in place by mainstream media outlets. So occasionally you have a story like this that is investigated by, a few individuals that does blow up into a bigger story that does get proper coverage and does lead to some actual change. Let's hope this is one of those cases.